Family is not about the blood that runs through your veins. It's about who bleeds for you when the world tries to drain you dry. The hospital air smelled like bleach and false hope. I stood in the corridor outside the ICU, watching my parents through the glass partition as they stood over my brother Leo's bed. He looked small beneath the white sheets, smaller than the 6-foot-tall carpenter who could build entire rooms with his hands. The melanoma had already taken everything from him except his stubbornness. Now, it was trying to take that too. My mother, Diane, didn't touch him. She stood with her arms crossed, her Hermes scarf draped perfectly despite the clinical fluorescence that made everyone else look like ghosts. My father, Silas, checked his watch. An actual glance down, a calculation of time, as though Leo's deterioration was eating into something more important. I had called them 3 hours ago. Leo's oncologist, Dr. Reeves, had outlined a treatment protocol that had worked in 43% of stage for melanoma cases. The therapy was called immunotherapy, cutting edge, expensive, and our only real option. It cost $120,000 for the first round alone. 3 rounds were recommended. Total cost, $360,000. When I finished explaining, there was silence. Then my father said the words that rewrote my entire understanding of family. We're in a liquidity crunch, Elena. The market is soft. We just don't have the liquid cash for a gamble like this. A gamble? My brother's life was a gamble. Now, watching them stand over him like he was a failed investment, I understood that they had already decided. The answer was no. It had always been no. And I was about to find out why. My mother turned to leave, and her purse, a limited edition Chanel bag that had cost, according to the price tag Brooke had carelessly left on it, $8,900, fell open against her leg. A folder slid out, glossy and cream-colored, landing face up on the linoleum. I picked it up automatically, the way you do when you've spent your entire life being helpful. The way you do when you've been conditioned to manage the chaos that other people create. Here, Mom, I said, extending it toward her. She snatched it away, but not before I'd seen what was inside. A receipt from something called Westfield Elite Academy, and beneath it, a bank statement showing a monthly transfer of $15,000, every single month like clockwork for the past 2 years. I knew that number. I paid my parents' bills. I did their taxes. I had access to their accounts, not because they trusted me with their finances, but because I was the reliable one, the paralegal daughter who could be counted on to handle the boring details while they lived their lives. Elena! My mother's voice was sharp. That's not your concern. The statement says Westfield Elite Academy. I said carefully. I don't know that we... It's for Brooke's children. My father's voice was clipped, authoritative. It's their grandparents' prerogative to fund their education. $15,000 a month. I heard myself ask, and the other folder mentions a trust fund. Silas didn't even look at me. He straightened his Italian suit jacket and moved toward the elevator. Family is about priorities. Elena. And right now, our priority is ensuring that the Vance legacy continues through the next generation. Leo didn't provide that. He didn't provide heirs. He didn't contribute to the family in any meaningful way. I felt the words like a physical blow. He's dying, I whispered. Yes, Diane said, her voice tired in the way that suggested she'd explained this to other people, and was tired of repeating herself. He is. And there's nothing we can do about it. Throwing good money after bad won't change that. She walked past me, her heels clicking on the linoleum like a metronome counting down Leo's life. I stood there, holding that folder, and felt something inside me calcify. The reliable daughter had just been shown her true value. 0. I was useful only until I asked for something that cost real money. That's when I made a decision that would reshape everything. I wasn't going to ask them again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Leo's living room, the cottage he'd built with his own hands in the woods outside of town, and I opened my laptop. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from rage. The cold, focused rage of someone who has finally understood that civilization is just a performance, and behind the curtain, the strong eat the weak. Leo was sleeping in the master bedroom, his morphine drip steady, his breathing shallow. I could hear him from where I sat, and every intake of breath felt like a countdown. I had access to my parents' financial accounts, not their personal accounts. Those were password protected and rotated frequently. But the business accounts for Vance Real Estate Investments, the firm that my father liked to brag about at country club dinners while I sat quietly and did their actual bookkeeping. I'd always been careful not to look too closely, not out of respect for privacy, but out of something worse, out of the belief that my parents knew better than I did, that if they said they didn't have money, they didn't have money, that if they said I was being unreasonable, I was being unreasonable. Tonight, I looked. The company owned 12 properties. 11 were rental houses in affluent suburban developments, the kind of houses that young executives bought as stepping stones towards something bigger. Vance Real Estate managed them, collected rent, and theoretically reinvested the income back into the portfolio. At least, that's what the official statements said. But I had access to the actual wire transfers, and the actual wire transfers told a different story. There was a shell company. It had been created 5 years ago and had no official purpose in any document I could find. But every month, like clockwork, $15,000 left Vance Real Estate's operating account and went into something called Westfield Investments, LLC. I traced the account. It wasn't hard. My father had written the password on a Post-it note, which he'd stuck to the underside of his keyboard. The arrogance was almost beautiful in its stupidity. Westfield Investments belonged to two people, my sister Brooke and someone named Marcus Chin. Marcus was Brooke's husband, the man who, according to family gossip, was finding himself and had never held a job in his life. What he was finding himself in, apparently, was my parents' embezzled money. The statement went back 5 years. $15,000 a month, every month for 60 months. That was $900,000 that had been funneled out of the business and into an account that funded Brooke's life of designer clothes, vacation homes, and now elite private academy tuition for children who hadn't earned anything except the genetic lottery of being born a Vance. Meanwhile, Leo was rationing his pain medication because even the copays were becoming unaffordable. I dug deeper. The 11 properties brought in approximately $80,000 a month in rental income combined. But the money wasn't being reinvested into the properties or paying down the commercial loans that the company had taken out. Instead, most of it was being siphoned elsewhere. I found a second transfer pattern. This one was going to something called the Meadowbrook Development Fund. And the fund, according to the paperwork, was supposed to be preparing for something huge, the sale of the 12th property, the crown jewel, the one property that the family talked about in hushed, reverent tones, the coastal estate. The coastal estate had been in my family's portfolio for 8 years. It was a massive Victorian mansion on the edge of a private cliff with floor-to-ceiling windows, a wine cellar, and grounds that looked like they'd been designed by someone who understood that humans needed beauty to survive. My father had paid $2.2 million for it. He hadn't lived in it. None of us had. Instead, he'd spent $300,000 renovating it, updated the electrical systems to modern code, and then nothing. It sat, empty and perfect, waiting for something. I pulled the property records, then the insurance documents, then the property assessments, and I found what I'd been looking for. The reason my parents had suddenly decided that Leo's life wasn't worth $360,000. The coastal estate was supposed to sell next month. The asking price was $4.8 million. My father had been preparing for this sale for 3 years. The liquidity crunch wasn't real. It was a lie designed to make Leo's death seem inevitable, acceptable, a force of nature rather than a choice. Once the sale closed, Silas and Diane Vance would be liquid again. More than liquid, they would be floating in wealth. And Brooke would get her summer home in Tuscany. Brooke's children would attend whatever elite schools she chose. And Leo would be dead. And I would be the reliable daughter who had done nothing to stop it. I pulled up the contract of sale. The buyer was a company called Solstice Acquisitions. I looked up the principals, a man named Marcus Thorne and a woman named Jennifer Winters. Neither name meant anything to me, but their email address was enlightening. They were representatives of an investment group based in the Caymans. I printed everything, every statement, every wire transfer, every piece of evidence that my parents weren't poor. They were thieves. They were choosing between their son's life and money they didn't even have yet, but had already mentally spent on luxury goods and tropical real estate. At 4 a.m., I sat on Leo's back porch and watched the sun try to rise over the trees. I didn't cry. The Elena who cried, who believed that love and loyalty eventually paid dividends, had died in that hospital hallway. What sat on this porch instead was someone colder, someone who understood that the world wasn't fair, and that sometimes the only justice you could get was the kind you built yourself. I opened my laptop and started making calls. The plan didn't come to me fully formed. It evolved over the next 2 weeks as I moved through my double life. By day, the reliable paralegal daughter who still showed up to work, still answered emails, still did her parents' taxes. By night, the architect of their destruction. The first piece fell into place when I called Dr. Reeves and asked for a different kind of help. Your brother's condition has stabilized, the oncologist told me. We have a treatment window. Elena, if we can get him into immunotherapy within 6 weeks, his 5-year survival rate jumps to 43%. After 6 weeks, that drops to 22%. After 8 weeks, we're looking at less than 10%. The cancer doesn't wait. 6 weeks. That was my deadline. But I also learned something else from Dr. Reeves that changed everything. The coastal estate sale was scheduled to close in exactly 35 days. My father had mentioned it to the doctor, bragging about how the sale would finally allow him to take care of family. Take care of family. The phrase made me want to scream. I spent the next week watching my parents, really watching them for the first time in my life. I saw them for what they were, people who had built their entire identity on the performance of being wealthy and important, and who had become so addicted to the performance that they'd forgotten how to see actual human beings. My mother spent $600 on a facial. My father took a trip to Miami to scout properties, even though they were in a liquidity crunch. Brooke called to ask if my parents would fund a trip to Monaco. They said yes without hesitation. And Leo, in his bed, counted the days until his body failed. On day 10 of my planning, I received a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His name was Julian Thorne, and he was a structural engineer. I'd met him once at a country club event when we were both teenagers. He'd been kind to me when my parents were ignoring me in favor of impressing more important people. He wasn't the one calling now. Ms. Vance, the voice was professional, measured. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm representing Solstice Acquisitions. I'm calling because your family's property, the coastal estate, is due to close in 30 days, and we need to schedule a final inspection. I paused, took a breath, and lied with the precision of someone who'd been practicing. Of course, I said, I'm the family's property manager. I'd be happy to facilitate that, but I should mention there are a few items in our inspection file that may require clarification. There was a slight pause. What kind of items? Structural items, I said, from the most recent assessment. I want to make sure everything's properly documented before the closing. Would you like me to email those to you? Yes, he said slowly. Please do. I hung up and immediately pulled the property inspection file. What I found made me smile. 2 years ago, when my father had purchased the coastal estate, the inspector's report had flagged a minor concern. The property sat on a cliff edge, and the inspector noted that there had been some evidence of soil settlement in the southwest corner of the foundation. He recommended a follow-up structural assessment. My father had ordered that follow-up assessment, and then he'd filed it away and never looked at it again. I found it in the archived documents folder, marked Do Not Include in Sales Packet. The structural engineer's report was 13 pages long, and it was devastating. The property wasn't just sitting on shifting soil. The entire southwestern quadrant of the house was slowly settling as the cliff face eroded beneath it. The engineer estimated that within 15 to 20 years, the settlement would accelerate dramatically. Walls would crack. Structural integrity would be compromised. The property would eventually become uninhabitable. The repair cost, he estimated, would be between $400,000 and $800,000. And my father had hidden this report from every potential buyer, every appraiser, and every inspector. This wasn't just fraud. This was the kind of fraud that could result in criminal charges. I made a copy of the report. Then I did something that was technically dishonest but felt like justice. I created a new email account under a fake name, and I sent the structural report to Marcus Thorne at Solstice Acquisitions with a message that read, I'm a local contractor who worked on the coastal estate. There's information about the foundation that the sellers aren't disclosing. You should get an independent assessment before closing. Then I sent the same report to the bank that was financing the buyer's purchase. Then I sent it to the county building department with a request for an emergency inspection due to public safety concerns. And then I did the one thing that would make sure this all fell apart. I called my parents. Hi, Dad, I said, my voice calm and professional. I'm updating our property files for the upcoming audit, and I noticed the structural report on the coastal estate is in the sales packet, the one that mentions the foundation settlement. I wanted to clarify, did you intend to include that with the closing documents? There was silence. Then, what are you talking about? The structural assessment from 2 years ago, I said slowly as though I was confused, not calculating. The one that said the southwest corner was settling due to cliff erosion? I have a copy here. I wasn't sure if the buyer's inspector had already flagged it, or if you were planning to address it before the sale. There is no report, my father said, but his voice had changed. It had the texture of a lie built on a foundation of fear. Actually, there is, I said. I'm looking at it right now. Should I forward it to your attorney to make sure we're compliant with disclosure requirements? Don't you dare, my father said, his voice sharp as a knife. This sale is critical, Elena. If you mention that report to anyone— I haven't mentioned it to anyone, Dad, I said. But I should warn you. I think the county building department might be requesting an emergency inspection. And the buyer's engineer might do one too. Just wanted to give you a heads up. I hung up, and then I waited. The next 48 hours unfolded like a masterpiece of chaos. Day 1. The county building inspector showed up at the coastal estate and found exactly what the report had promised, a structural defect serious enough to warrant an immediate notice of concern. He closed the property pending repairs. Day 2. The buyer's engineer, having received multiple warnings about foundation issues, conducted his own assessment and confirmed that the property had a serious structural problem that would cost a minimum of $600,000 to repair. He recommended the buyer pull out of the deal. Day 3. The bank Informed by both the county and the engineer's report that the property had a major defect that the seller had hidden, refused to finance the deal. Without financing, the buyer had no reason to close. Marcus Thorne from Solstice Acquisitions called my father directly. I could hear his voice through my father's phone, cold, professional, and utterly devastating. Your property has a significant structural defect that you failed to disclose. We are withdrawing our offer. We are also considering whether to pursue legal action for fraud. The $4.8 million sale disappeared in 3 days, but the destruction was just beginning. Once the deal fell apart, my father was forced to explain to the bank why they suddenly had a massive property liability on their hands. The bank demanded to know why the structural report hadn't been disclosed. My father claimed it was an oversight, a clerical error. The bank didn't believe him. They audited the entire Vance real estate portfolio, and once they started looking at the numbers, they found what I had found. The shell company, the $15,000 monthly transfers, the embezzled funds that were supposed to be paying down the commercial loans. It took 7 days for my parents to be notified that they were in default. It took 14 days for foreclosure proceedings to begin. I was doing Leo's evening medications when my father called. His voice sounded like something fractured. "Elena," he said, "we need to talk about the business. There's been a complication." "What kind of complication?" I asked, though I already knew. "The bank has frozen our accounts. They're saying we're in default on multiple loans. They're threatening foreclosure." "Elena, I don't know what happened. I don't know how this is possible." I set down the medication syringe and looked at my brother, sleeping peacefully, the morphine keeping him comfortable even as his body waged war against itself. "I don't know, Dad," I said gently. "Maybe someone at the bank noticed the shell company, the one that's been funneling $15,000 a month to Brooke for the past 5 years." The silence on the other end of the line was exquisite. "You don't know what you're talking about," he finally said, but the confidence was gone. "Actually, I do," I said. "I know that Westfield Investments has received exactly $900,000 from Vance Real Estate over the past 5 years. I know that you used that money to fund Brooke's lifestyle while claiming to be tapped out for Leo's medical care. I know that you hid a structural defect in the coastal estate and lied to the buyer. And I know that when the bank started investigating why you weren't paying your loans, they found all of it." "Elena," my father started. "No," I said. "You had a choice. You had enough money to save Leo's life. You had enough money to do the right thing. And you chose not to. You chose Brooke's summer home. You chose Brooke's designer bags. You chose to let your son die because investing in his survival didn't appeal to you." I hung up. 3 hours later, my mother called. Then Brooke. Then Silas again, his voice desperate now, begging me to help him fix the situation. I didn't answer. I had already fixed it. On day 21 after the sale collapsed, I received an unexpected visitor at Leo's cottage. He was a well-dressed man in his 50s with kind eyes and the manner of someone accustomed to solving other people's problems. His name was Mr. Sterling, and he introduced himself as a private investor. "Your father's bank accounts were seized," he began without preamble. "His properties are being liquidated. He's facing potential criminal charges for fraud and falsifying documents. He's in a very difficult position." "I'm aware," I said. "What you may not be aware of," Mr. Sterling continued, "is that there are ways to help him. Ways that don't involve the courts, and ways that don't require him to face prison time." I felt my stomach tighten. "What kind of ways?" "The kind," Mr. Sterling said carefully, "that involves someone with power of attorney over certain assets making decisions about those assets. Someone like you." I understood then. Mr. Sterling wasn't here to help my father. He was here to exploit him. But more importantly, He was here because my father was desperate enough to send him. What are you proposing? I asked. Your brother is in remission now, Mr. Sterling said. The immunotherapy worked. He's stable. His treatment costs are covered by a trust we've set up for him. What you need to understand is that this trust will continue to provide for his care, his recovery, his future. All you have to do is ensure that your parents sign over their remaining assets to a protective fund. For your brother's long-term care, of course. I understood what he was really saying. Give me your parents' assets, and I'll ensure Leo stays alive. It was extortion dressed up in concern. But it was also an opportunity. I'll need to consult with Leo's legal guardian, I said, and with a lawyer. I can't just sign things away. Of course, Mr. Sterling said, leaving his card. But do understand, Ms. Vance, your brother's condition is fragile. The immunotherapy will work, but only if he has proper follow-up care, proper monitoring, proper medication management, all of which requires money. And right now, your parents have very little of it. After he left, I sat on Leo's porch and made a decision. I was going to save my brother, but not the way Mr. Sterling intended. It took me 3 days to find it because my father had been careful, but not careful enough. Hidden in the safe deposit box at the bank, registered under my father's mother's maiden name, was a life insurance policy. It had been taken out 30 years ago, the day Leo was born. The policy was unusual. It was a return of premium policy, which meant that my father had been paying into it for 3 decades with the expectation of getting his money back if the insured person survived to a certain age. But Leo wasn't on that policy. I was. The cash surrender value was $640,000. And my father had taken out another policy on me 28 years ago, also $640,000 in cash value. And Brooke's policy was for $800,000. I sat in the bank's office staring at the statements, and I finally understood the cruelty of my parents' arithmetic. They had invested in life insurance for their daughters because we were predictable. We could be controlled. We could be relied upon to make good investments, to marry well, to produce heirs. But Leo was an artist. He was unpredictable. He was unreliable in the way that all creative people are unreliable. He didn't follow the prescribed path. So they hadn't insured his life. They'd let it expire as a bad investment. Except there was one more policy, one that my father had hidden even from himself. A 10-year term life policy on Leo, taken out when Leo was a child. Not for Leo's benefit, for my father's. The death benefit was $500,000, and the policy was still active. My father had been gambling on his son's death for a decade. If Leo died, Silas Vance would collect $500,000, a payout that would more than cover the structural repairs on the coastal estate, the embezzled funds, the legal fees from the fraud investigation. A payout that would make Leo's death financially beneficial. I closed my eyes and felt something inside me crystallize into pure, clean purpose. It took me another week to gather the evidence I needed. But what I found was elegant in its simplicity. My father, desperate and facing bankruptcy, had called his insurance agent and inquired about the cash surrender value on his investment in his children's lives. The agent had noted in his file, client interested in liquidating policies for immediate cash. Expressed particular interest in the T10 term life policy on minor child, asked about payout scenarios in event of death versus sale of policy, seemed distressed regarding financial situation. That note, combined with the phone records showing calls to my father's attorney about estate planning, combined with the audit trail showing him increasingly desperate for liquid funds, told a story that was damning. My father wasn't just a bad parent. He was a parent who had calculated whether his son's death was worth more than his son's life. I took all of this to a lawyer named Catherine Price. She was sharp, experienced, and furious. This is criminal, she said flatly. The fraud on the property sale is one thing, but this is a father who is financially incentivized to let his son die. We can file charges. We can pursue this aggressively. I don't want him in prison. I said, I want him to sign. Catherine looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she nodded. What do you want him to sign? Everything, I said. I want complete legal guardianship over Leo. I want power of attorney over all remaining assets. I want the policies liquidated and the proceeds placed in a trust for Leo's care. And I want him to agree that if he ever comes near my brother again, he'll face both civil and criminal action. That's quite a list, Catherine said. He created it. I replied. My father's attorney called me 3 days later. They wanted to negotiate. I agreed to meet them at my office, in a space where I controlled the environment. My father sat across from me for the first time since the hospital hallway, and I barely recognized him. The weight loss was dramatic. The gray had consumed his dark hair completely. The hands that had once signed contracts worth millions were shaking. I don't know what you want from me, he said, his voice hollow. I want you to save Leo, I replied calmly. And since you've proven incapable of that on your own, I'm going to save him using your money. Elena! No, I said. You don't get to talk. You get to listen. You are going to sign over complete guardianship of Leo to me. You are going to liquidate all of your remaining assets, the rental properties, the investment accounts, the insurance policies, and place them in a trust for Leo's care. You are going to testify that you have no financial interest in Leo's life or death, and you are going to walk away. Your mother can join you in the walk, I said. She made the same choice you did. My father's attorney stepped in. Ms. Vance, your father is willing to provide financial support for your brother's care. But guardianship is a significant legal matter. There are terms we can negotiate. There are no terms, Catherine said, sliding a folder across the table. Here is the documentation of fraud regarding the coastal estate. Here is the evidence of embezzlement from the business accounts. Here is the phone record showing your client inquiring about the death benefit on his minor son's life insurance policy. And here is a summary of the criminal charges that will be filed if you do not accept this agreement. My father's face had gone gray. If I sign, he said slowly, the criminal charges go away? If you sign, Catherine confirmed, and if you never contact your daughter or your son again, and if you liquidate every asset you have into the trust, then yes, we will not pursue criminal charges. We will instead allow you to disappear into whatever life you can build with whatever remains of your reputation. He signed. It took 2 hours for my father to review the documents, for Catherine to walk through the terms, for the notary to witness the signatures. When it was done, my father looked at me one final time. I'm sorry, he said. No, you're not, I replied. You're sorry you got caught. That's not the same thing. The assets liquidated quickly once my father's attorney started the process. The rental properties sold within 6 weeks. I made sure of that by personally managing the sales and rejecting any offer below market value. The investment accounts were frozen and liquidated. The insurance policies were surrendered. Their cash values transferred into a trust account bearing Leo's name. Total liquidation, $2.4 million. I used the first $360,000 to pay for the rest of Leo's immunotherapy. The treatment worked in ways that defied the odds. By week 8, his scans showed no visible tumors. By week 12, his oncologist used the word remission with cautious optimism. By week 16, Leo was strong enough to stand. By week 24, he was walking. The second $500,000 went into a dedicated medical trust for his long-term care and monitoring. The cancer could return. Melanoma was treacherous that way. But now, When it tried, Leo would have the best care money could buy. The remaining $1.5 million became something else entirely. I didn't tell Leo what I'd done. Not all of it. I told him about the trust, about the liquidated accounts, about the money that was now dedicated to his care. I didn't tell him about the life insurance policy his father had taken out hoping for his death. Some cruelties were better left undiscovered. Instead, I told him about an idea I had. Remember when we were kids, I said, and Dad used to talk about building a retreat center? A place where families going through medical crises could come and be restored. Leo nodded slowly. I remember. He said it was too expensive, that it wasn't practical. It's practical now, I said. We have the money. We have your story. We have the space. The coastal estate had sold, eventually, at a dramatically reduced price to a developer who was aware of its structural issues and had factored the repair costs into his offer. But that wasn't where the retreat was going to be. It was going to be where my father's empire had been. I had purchased the primary Vance residence, the house where I'd grown up, the house where I'd done my parents' taxes for free while they planned my brother's death, and I had converted it into something healing. Leo's Rest, a recovery center for families navigating terminal illness, cancer treatment, and the aftermath of medical crisis. 20 rooms, a meditation garden, a commercial kitchen, art studios where people could create beauty while their bodies were being tortured by healing. The first patient to arrive was a boy named Marcus, who had stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma, and a family who loved him but was terrified of losing him. The second was a young woman named Sophia, who'd survived ovarian cancer, but was struggling with the psychological aftermath. The third was an elderly man named Thomas, whose daughter had abandoned him when his Parkinson's diagnosis made him inconvenient. And Leo, healthy and strong, worked in the woodshop creating beautiful pieces, tables and chairs and bed frames that held families together while they held each other through the worst moments of their lives. My mother tried to contact me once. It was 8 months after the signatures, after the liquidation, after Leo had been cleared for a 6-month remission check. She sent a letter to my office. I didn't open it. Instead, I read the return address, which was a 2-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of town, and I understood that the Vance empire had truly crumbled. I filed the letter away without reading it. The silence felt cleaner. My father I never heard from at all. According to some distant acquaintance who ran into my cousin, he'd moved to another state and was working in real estate again, starting from nothing. The thought of his humiliation would have brought satisfaction to the old Elena. This Elena just felt empty. Not sad, empty, like a bottle that had held poison, and was finally clean. Brooke had tried to contact me too. She showed up at Leo's Rest one afternoon, looking desperate. "Elena," she'd said, her voice thin and fractured. "I know Mom and Dad did terrible things, but I'm your sister. Surely you." "You're not my sister," I'd replied calmly. "A sister doesn't watch while her brother dies because it's inconvenient. A sister doesn't sip expensive lattes while I scrub floors to pay for his treatment. You were a guest in our family who stayed too long." I'd handed her a job application. "If you want to work here, truly work here, no special treatment, no salary proportional to your previous lifestyle, I can use someone in housekeeping. Otherwise, please leave." She didn't apply. She left, and I haven't heard from her since. A year after opening, Leo's Rest had served 43 families. The success rate was hard to quantify, but the impact was visible. Patients arriving hollow-eyed and traumatized, leaving with something restored. Not hope necessarily. Some of those people would still die, cancer being a cruel lottery that took the young and spared the old with no particular justice. But peace, a kind of peace that came from knowing that someone had built a place specifically designed to hold them while they broke apart. Leo had become, unexpectedly, a counselor, He would sit with new patients in the woodshop, teaching them to work with his hands. And somehow, the smell of sawdust and the rhythm of creation dissolved the worst of the terror. People who'd been told by their families that they were inconvenient learned, in Leo's presence, that their existence mattered. I watched my brother, who should have been dead, who only existed because I had been willing to be ruthless, and I felt something that wasn't quite happiness, but was close. It was satisfaction. It was the knowledge that I had taken the worst choice a family could make and transformed it into something that was saving other families from making the same choice. On the first-year anniversary of Leo's rest opening, I stood in the meditation garden and received a call from Catherine Price, my lawyer. "Elena," she said, and her voice sounded strange. "I thought you should know. Your father is getting remarried. He's settled in Arkansas. He's working for a small real estate firm. He seems happy." I felt nothing. That was the most surprising part. I felt absolutely nothing. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "Are you okay?" Catherine asked, and there was genuine concern in her voice. "I'm better than okay," I replied, looking at the garden, at Leo visible through the windows of the woodshop, at the families who were learning how to survive together. "I'm free." It was late spring when Leo made the discovery that would have destroyed me once. I was in my office when he appeared in the doorway, holding something that looked like an old wooden box. "I was cleaning out the basement," he said, "and I found this under the original floorboards. It was sealed. I think it's from when I was a kid. There's your name on it." I opened it carefully. Inside were letters, 37 of them, written in my father's handwriting, each one dated, and each one beginning with the same phrase, "To Elena, in case something happens to me." I read them slowly late into the night, and what I found in those letters rewrote everything I thought I understood about my father. If you're reading this, it means I've made a terrible mistake. I've gotten lost in the performance of being successful, and I've forgotten to be good. I've forgotten that you and Leo are not investments. You're the only things in my life that have ever mattered, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose you because I'll be too late to realize that. Elena, you have always been the bridge. You've always held everyone together, even when it cost you everything. If I'm gone, please don't do that anymore. Please hold yourself. Leo needs you too. The family needs you too. But more importantly, you need you too. I know I'm choosing wrong. I'm choosing money over Leo's life, and I know it's wrong even as I'm doing it. What I don't understand is how I became the kind of man who could make that choice, who could stand in a hospital corridor and calculate my son's worth in dollars. I don't recognize myself anymore. I'm afraid you won't recognize me when you finally look. The final letter was different. It was dated the day before everything collapsed. Elena, by the time you read this, you'll know what I was. You'll know about the insurance policies, the embezzlement, the choices I made. You'll hate me, and you should. But I want you to know one thing. I was always planning to tell you. I was always planning to confess everything. I was just waiting for the right moment, the moment when I could be certain you'd understand that I was sick, and not because of cancer, but because of something worse, the slow disease of forgetting how to be human. The moment came too late. By the time I was ready to be honest, you'd already discovered everything. And now you're going to have to make a choice, whether to punish me or to save Leo. I suspect I know what you'll choose. It's what you've always chosen. It's what makes you better than me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for so much. If I could remake this, if I could rewind to the moment where I chose money over my son's life and choose differently, I would. But I can't. All I can do is leave you this confession and hope that one day, when you're not drowning in anger, you can forgive the man I became and remember the man I meant to be. With all the love I never knew how to show, Dad. I held the letter for a long time. Then I gave them all to Leo to read. He was sick, Leo said after he'd finished. He wasn't evil. He was just lost. Does that matter? I asked. I don't know, Leo said, but I think it matters that he left them, that he was trying to tell you something, that even at his worst, some part of him knew he was doing wrong. I thought about that for a long time. It took me 6 months to write the email, but one day I did. Dear Dad, I found the letters. I read them all, and I want you to know something. I understand now. Not what you did, that I'll never understand, but why you did it. You were lost. You were a man who'd spent so long performing success that you forgot what actual happiness looked like. And when presented with a choice between the performance and the real thing, you chose the performance because it was all you knew. I'm not forgiving you. What you did was unforgivable. But I'm releasing you from the burden of my hate. That burden has been too heavy for me to carry, and it's not changing anything for you. So I'm putting it down. Leo is alive. He's in remission. He's building beautiful things and helping beautiful people. That's your legacy now. Not the empire you tried to build, but the son you failed to see, who survived anyway. I'm building something too. It's called Leo's Rest. And it's a place where families learn how to choose each other over everything else. Every single day, in that place, people choose love over money. They choose their children over their comfort. They choose right because they understand what it costs not to. I think you should know that your life, the life you lived before, has become a lesson. People come to Leo's Rest terrified that they'll become like you, that they'll get so lost in the chase for success that they'll forget to notice their families disappearing. And then they see what happens when you choose wrong, and they choose right instead. So in a way, you're still changing the world. Just not in the way you planned. Live well, Dad. Be happy. And maybe, in another life, we'll know each other as something other than enemies and victims. Elena, I sent it without rereading it, and I never got a response which felt exactly right. 2 years after Leo's Rest opened, I received a call from my father's attorney. He wanted to meet with me. I agreed, out of curiosity more than anything else. What the attorney told me was that my father had rewritten his will. Every penny he'd managed to accumulate in Arkansas, which wasn't much, maybe $300,000, was going to Leo's Rest. He'd set it up so that the money came anonymously through a trust so that no one would know it came from him. He never stopped loving you, the attorney said, or Leo. He just didn't know how to show it in a way that mattered. I didn't cry, but I did something I hadn't expected. I thanked him. And I added a plaque to the meditation garden. It didn't have my father's name on it. It had a quote instead. Family is about who bleeds for you when the world tries to drain you dry. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to learn that. Sometimes it's too late to matter. But sometimes, it's just in time to save someone else from the same mistakes. 5 years after the coastal estate sale collapsed, Leo's Rest had become a recognized leader in family-centered medical crisis support. We'd expanded to 3 locations. We'd helped over 400 families. And most importantly, we'd cultivated a culture where money was never more important than life. The payments came from insurance companies, from charitable donations, and increasingly from families who could afford it, who chose to pay forward the gift they'd received. I wasn't wealthy in the traditional sense. The $2.4 million had gone to Leo's Care and the foundation. I made a modest salary as the director of Leo's Rest. I lived in a small cottage outside of town, not far from the cottage where Leo had nearly died, but different now. Clean. Healed. I had 2 cats and a garden where I grew tomatoes that were never quite ripe enough and basil that thrived despite my negligence. I had a life that was quiet and purposeful, and that was enough. Leo, in remission now for 6 years, had married a woman named Claire who worked as an art therapist. They were talking about having children. The idea that Leo would be a father, a man who chose his children, who would never calculate their worth in dollars, filled me with a quiet joy that no amount of revenge ever could have. One afternoon, as I was walking through the meditation garden at Leo's Rest, I encountered a father and his daughter. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, and the father was crying silently, his hand clasped around hers. "My daughter has cancer," he said to me, as though I'd asked, and I couldn't imagine life without her. I couldn't imagine a scenario where I wouldn't do everything possible to save her. And I keep wondering, how do parents not do that? How do parents choose anything else? "Some people forget what matters," I said gently, "or they never learned in the first place. But you chose right." He nodded, and he pulled his daughter closer, and I watched them sit together in the garden, choosing each other over every other consideration in the universe. That was the real revenge, not destroying my parents. That had just been necessary. The real victory was building a place where people learned to choose love over and over again, until it became automatic, until it became who they were. I stood in the woodshop one afternoon, watching Leo work. He was creating a bed frame for a new patient, a young woman who'd survived breast cancer and needed a physical reminder that she'd made it through. The wood was beautiful, cherry that he'd aged for 2 years, and his hands moved with the precision of someone who'd learned that beauty mattered, that creating something lasting, something that could hold someone through their worst moments, was the most important work in the world. "How much do you hate them?" he asked me, without looking up from his work. I thought about it honestly. "I don't," I said. "That's the strangest part. I think I did, for a long time. I hated them so much it burned. But now I just feel sad. Sad that they wasted so much time being the wrong version of themselves. Sad that they didn't get to experience the kind of peace that comes from choosing right." Leo nodded, setting down his tools. "Do you ever regret what you did? The way you handled it?" "No," I said, and I meant it completely. "I regret that they forced me to do it. I regret that I had to become ruthless to save you. But I don't regret the outcome, because the outcome is you, alive, building beauty, and this place, and every family we've helped. Mom sent another letter?" Leo said carefully, "I did know. My mother had started writing to me through a mutual acquaintance, since I wouldn't accept her direct contact. The letters were filled with remorse and explanations and pleas for forgiveness. I still didn't read them. Some wounds didn't need to be reopened. "I do know," I said. "What does she want?" "To meet you," Leo said. "To explain herself. To be part of your life again." I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, "When she's willing to donate $100,000 to Leo's Rest in front of a public audience, and she writes a letter to every family she knows explaining why it's important to choose your children over everything else, then maybe we can talk. Until then, her remorse is between her and her conscience." Leo smiled slightly. "That's very conditional." "It is," I agreed. "But actions matter more than words. She had the chance to choose love, and she chose vanity. Now she gets to live with that choice. I've already been generous enough by not pursuing criminal charges." The sun was setting as I walked back to my office. I passed through the meditation garden, past the plaque with the quote I'd chosen, past families holding each other as they processed their grief and their strength. I thought about the girl I'd been, the reliable daughter who'd done everything right and gotten nothing in return. The girl who'd believed that loyalty was a currency, that family was automatic, that love was a given. That girl was gone. She'd been cremated in a hospital hallway and reborn as someone harder, colder, more precise. But she'd also become someone more alive. Because the truth is, revenge isn't about destroying people. It's about taking back your own power from people who've stolen it from you. It's about understanding that you don't have to earn love, you have to demand it. That you don't have to accept cruelty, you can choose to end it. I destroyed my parents' empire because they'd shown me that empires built on favoritism and lies collapse anyway. I'd save my brother's life because that's what love looks like when the moment comes to choose. And I built Leo's rest because I wanted to make sure that no other family had to learn these lessons the hard way. That no other child would stand in a hospital corridor and realize that their life was less valuable than a handbag. My name is Elena Vance. I was the reliable daughter. I was the bridge that everyone walked across while ignoring my own pain. Now, I'm the architect of my own life. And that, I thought as I watched the sun disappear beyond the horizon, is a legacy worth building. This is a story about the moment when love demands justice. It's about understanding that sometimes protecting family means standing against family. And it's about discovering that the greatest revenge isn't the destruction you cause. It's the beautiful thing you build from the ashes. If you've ever felt like the reliable one in a family that took you for granted, if you've ever sacrificed everything for people who wouldn't sacrifice anything for you, this story is yours. Your silence doesn't make you weak. Your boundaries don't make you selfish. Your survival makes you a force of nature. The revolution happens when you decide to stop being the bridge and start being the architect.